anything that somebody creates is a reflection of themselves and of what's going on in their mind, in their life, in their space.
This is Champagne is Also a Band podcast. One songwriter, one song. I'm Sven, your host for a journey into the music of Champaign-Urbana. Recorded in the Blue Box studio with a songwriter from the Champaign-Urbana music scene, past or present. Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to be a part of the Champagne Showers Podcast Network. Welcome to Champagne is Also a Band podcast. Today, I have Bryce Hays. And you may know Bryce Hays from such bands as Withershins, Dr. Responsible, and of course, Marathon. So, Bryce, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Today, we're going to be talking about your song, Eternal Return, off of the Mount Fuji in Blue album. And now I'm completely blanking, and I didn't write it down. I'm trying to remember what date that was. When was that released, maybe?
Fuji, yeah, that would have been August of 2014.
Without further ado, let's listen to the song. Welcome back. So, of course, my first and favorite question to always ask is, what came first? Was it the music or was it the lyrics?
The music. For me, it's pretty much always the music. I've never really considered myself much of a lyricist. A lot of my lyrics just kind of start as placeholder. I just kind of want to find a melody, find something that meshes with the song, and then kind of make it mean something later. That's my primary songwriting tactic.
One of the distinctive, Withershins sounds is the ethereal, the kind of droney sound, the effects-driven guitar sound. I'm just curious, when you began working on the music, were you playing with an acoustic guitar? Did you happen to hop onto a piano? Did you have an electric guitar that you were messing around with delay? Or I'm just curious, what was that first magic moment, so to speak?
Yeah, so for this one, I would have been in one of my old apartments in Urbana, tiny little one-bedroom apartment. I had a little kind of corner closet that I turned into a makeshift studio rehearsal room. And yeah, I would have been with my electric guitar just through my pedal board. That's kind of how I generally would play and practice. And yeah, so that's how I would generally work through things, just, with my guitar, pedal board, full effects.
It's funny because talking about Withershins songs, I always hesitate because I want to say, in the chorus or, in the verse. And the thing about Withershins songs is that they're kind of formless but formed. And I don't know, should I say non-standard formatting? So, I don't know, there's a return point, which you could almost say is the chorus, but it's not really chorus. It doesn't function as a chorus because it always has some different element, and it's not always the big part. Chorus, you think of this big, huge part. So I'm kind of curious, were you doing what I would call kind of the verse part where it's the starting, the images of rot and decay. So you're talking about that F major and B flat major, those alternating back and forth, or was it that intro that you created? Or I'm just curious, what was the first point at which it began? If you remember.
Yeah, no, I totally remember. The intro part is kind of what started it. I was honestly just playing around with different chord voicings that I hadn't really done before. So I was just, moving around some different chord shapes, trying to think of different ways to approach my guitar. And I just kind of came across this little progression that I kind of thought was nice. I thought it sounded really pretty. And I just decided to kind of build off of that and make something from it, which is interesting because, I don't know that it actually ended up being the outcome. I set out to kind of build off this idea that I already had. And then I kind of formed the whole intro, which I do think kind of built off of my original progression that I had done. And then when it comes into the first, let's call it a verse, when the vocals come in, that's sort of a bit of a departure. The intro was definitely the seed for that one.
I sometimes struggle with talking about Withershins songs because there's sometimes a sense of a misdirect, or there's a sense of it's going to go on a journey this way, and then it's almost like the intro sometimes gives a different story, sometimes your instrumental part gives a different story. Then of course there's the outro that either is prepping you for what will happen as the next song, or is even just vamping out. The ending I just find really interesting because it ends up being such a Withershins ending because it's not like you're ending on the tonic. You're using the fifth of the key. So you're doing that C major. No, is it? Yeah, a C major, or at least just the C and the G as this kind of bass. And then it kind of... And I'm just curious, when did these elements kind of form into what the song became today? When did you add the lyrics, and when did you actually get a concept of what you wanted the song to be about, if that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess to answer that, I do feel like I should back up a little bit. So this was one of relatively few songs in the Withershins catalog that was predominantly written by me. I kind of came up with all the little component parts and put them together at home, just kind of practicing. A lot of times in that band, Isaac was one of the primary songwriters, and there are plenty of songs that started with riffs or ideas that I'd come up with. Same with Colin, Neil. I mean, pretty much everyone in the band has contributed something, kind of created a seed to a song. But a lot of it was stuff that we would actually kind of compose together. in the practice space, someone would bring an idea or a riff and we would build off of it together. There are a handful of tunes that an individual would just bring and say, hey, this is pretty much a finished song, let's flesh it out, So this was one of those kind of rare instances. I wrote all of the parts and kind of arranged them together myself. I recorded a demo, just instrumental, and I brought it to the rest of the band. So at the time, and actually probably for the first several times we played it, it was just kind of instrumental. It was just, there were the pieces there. We were kind of adding to them as a band. And I want to say after we'd practiced it a few times, I was at home and I knew it needed lyrics, right? But I didn't know what they wanted to be. Again, it started with a melody, which this song doesn't have much of a melody, to be fair, but it just started with me like vocalizing ideas that I thought sounded good with the song. And through that process, eventually kind of some words started sneaking in here and there, and I built it off of that. My approach to lyric writing is almost always just see what sounds good with the song and ascribe a meaning to it later. This song does have some lyrical content. There are like themes that I'm kind of talking about in there, but I wouldn't say I explore them too deeply. For me, lyrics have always been more of a means to an end. I'm more of a sound guy than a words guy.
Well, and it's really interesting though, in the way that the lyrics are presented, at least until you get to what I want to call like kind of the false chorus, which is I don't mean to sound sappy. The section before then, the vocals are functioning very much like an instrument in itself, because you've got kind of a delay and they're, I don't want to say buried, but they're saturated with some effects, and it's kind of I almost want to say it's like the voice struggling to bring out meaning through this part. Interesting that you're talking about images of rot and decay keep falling into my head. I love the fact that this song feels like it could fold in on itself. The things that are negative in the first section, if I want to say that this is set up between two sections, so it has like the first part, and then it has the intro and lyrics, and then it has the lyrics, and then it has the outro. Distinction is these words that you swap in each of the sections that give the same feeling, but also like as if the first section is about despair and then the second section is about maybe improving, but yet they kind of yin and yang each other by having those swapped ideas. I don't know. I'm curious, like, when those concepts kind of came together. Did you sit with a piece of paper and like write these out, or I'm just curious about your method? I'm sorry, I just kind of went off on a whole tangent, but that's how we do things.
Yeah, no, that's great. At first, it started out just sort of me just improvising words to fill the space that I'd already kind of thought should contain lyrics. And so the first half is kind of what I landed on first. And that was just through like me repeating it and just singing along, saying things, seeing what comes to mind. And then after I kind of got that first part, then I sat down with it with some paper and started thinking about, okay, where would I like this to go? What do I want it to mean? And so, yeah, I was talking about images of rot and decay. So the idea of the first one is like my input is kind of negative, but then what I send back from that into the world is more positive, right? So, images of rot and decay are falling into my head, but what comes back out for me is, vibrantly green and beautiful. And yeah, so then the second verse, I thought, well, what do I want to go with the song from there? And then, sometimes I could also be a little bit of a lazy songwriter. So I thought, what can I do? And I could kind of reverse that, it does work both ways, right? Like I started thinking about like, okay, so like, what if I'm receiving like, this positivity from the world, this beautiful input, then what comes back? What can I give back? A lot of times for me, meaning in lyrics is kind of secondary.
For me, I'm always like, well, there has to be some kind of motivation, but I understand like where it's in as much as you figure out a chord progression and you're like, these chords go together and they belong together and they sound good together. And in much that same way, you can also write lyrics where you're like, these words go together and these words sound good together. It almost gives its own meta sense of itself, because you're spitting out these words that are based upon these things that come to you, but then you make them function kind of a mirror image in the second section. And, I kept writing words like, is this loss? Is this change? And I kept thinking like, was there something that came about or happened that made this happen? But it's also like sometimes that auto writing or figuring out what fits together sometimes doesn't have to have a meaning, but it gets meaning by when it gets recorded or performed. I don't know. Sure. I'm sorry. That was so...
Well,
as I said, I felt random.
I think that totally makes sense to me. I would also say that, like, even if there's not like a lot of intention of a deeper meaning, like anything that somebody creates is a reflection of themselves and of what's going on in their mind, in their life, in their space. I could say that I didn't intend to have a lot of like ultra deep meaning when I started writing these words, but you mentioned change. I think that's probably the most apt description of, what I might have been thinking of when I was working on these things. As I was writing these words of sort of opposites, right? Growth and formation versus rot and decay, vibrantly green and living versus violently green and dying. These are things that, like, I was kind of thinking of along the lines of, cyclical time, changing seasons, changing patterns, like everything sort of like going in sort of a full circle. And that was, I guess, kind of what was on my mind when I was coming up with these ideas. At the same time, you also mentioned the vocals being, somewhat buried in the mix in the recorded version. And that was also kind of an intentional choice. The album was mixed for us, and, they would send us back rough mixes and ask for notes or feedback. And the original mix of that, the vocals were much higher. They kind of were standing out, from the rest of the song. And that, to me, just didn't feel right for the song, right? I wanted it to be like more... when I sing, I do want my vocals to function more as another instrument versus like, a person with a microphone who has something to say.
I want to say, though, that what strikes me is that in both the I don't mean to sound sappy or I don't mean to sound shitty, and then also the I've been told it doesn't matter because we're already gone, I feel like those are where the vocals come out the most, at least for me. And I don't know if that's just because in my brain worldview, I'm projecting onto these lyrics, which that's what lyrics are for, and that's why you listen to them. But, those stand out to me as a very, I want to say, like, clarity of thought. And therefore also the clarity comes out in terms of how they are presented in the recording. I find it fascinating the way that maybe that wasn't intentional, but to me it just feels like that kind of pops out. As I like to say, my interpretation of your lyrics probably tells people more about me than it does about you. But I keep thinking about this human that's dealing with like their own sense of how they relate and exist within the world. And you brought it up with the idea of like, there's positive things coming in, and then I spit out maybe violent things, or there's negative things coming in and I appreciate their beauty, or I spit back out beautiful things. There's such a sense of Withershins type things that come up in my mind are very much like, it's never exactly clear to me, but I feel it. Which I think is something that I really appreciate about Withershins' music in general. When you brought this to the rest of the band, in your mind, had most of it been formed? Or how did that solidify into the song that we hear now?
I would say, like, as far as the guitar part is concerned, I think that was mostly, and again, I chose to pick a song that we recorded over 11 years ago to talk about. So some details may be inaccurate. I believe that I had all of like my guitar parts at least like just structured out, and I kind of mapped them out, and said, this is what I want to do, and this is the order I want to do it in, and I brought to the band. And from there it becomes, okay, so how do we build off of this, right? So like, I'm not the drummer in the band. I play drums a little bit. Sometimes I would like try and bring some ideas of how I might want drums to sound, but for the most part I say like, this is not my area of expertise, so I leave that, to, in this case, Luke. And, for bass, again, I would like to give Neil a whole lot of freedom with that. What did we have in there? There were some auxiliary parts. So I can't remember what Colin's doing on this one. I'd have to look at that. But again, with Isaac, they're talented guitarist, I'm not trying to put them in a box, right? I'm saying, okay, this is what I'm playing, complement it, in whatever way you feel is appropriate. So that's kind of how the process would go for this track. And again, I didn't have the lyrics yet. I just brought the music and said, what are we going to do with this? And then later on at home, I'm coming up with lyrics and stuff. I mentioned that I don't consider myself much of a lyricist. I would often not even really explicitly tell the rest of the band what I'm saying until we're recording it, because I'm just like, I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm embarrassed by the words I write. I just didn't want that criticism until it was too late.
Oh, yeah. I feel that. I was trying to figure out at the end, in the outro, what is happening subdivided-wise in terms of that outro, the drum is doing a nice little snare part, and it's doing like in threes and then twos and then threes and twos, and we can skip this or whatever. But do you remember how that was like counted out, or do you remember? Because
no, I mean, I will say when I came up with the outro riff that I'm playing on guitar, I wasn't really planning it out, in terms of like beats. I wasn't counting it out. You mentioned the outro earlier, how it doesn't kind of like resolve to like the tonic chord of the key at the end. And that's something that I always enjoyed doing, that I think we did pretty effectively as a band, is just like kind of exploring the space within like a, like a chord or like a short riff, and just kind of like building it out and expanding on it, and not necessarily like coming down on that satisfying note, but just like letting the song, I don't know, I guess like kind of breathe for a second, just like, take a deep breath, wrap up, and done. But anyway, to answer your question, I just, came up with this riff where I'm, kind of droning on that last chord that I'm playing, and then I started kind of tapping a little melody on top of it, just, and that's just the rhythm that I just kind of settled on. It came to me.
Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, I think Luke is more or less just kind of like mirroring that with the snare hits.
Right.
So there wasn't ever a whole lot of just like counting it out and figuring it out. It was just, I was playing that. I'm sure Luke took the time to count it out and figure it out so he could play along with me.
Sure. I mean, that's one thing that I do love about Withershins is like these like polyrhythms that seem to crop up. It stops feeling like it's 4/4, and it feels like it's these subdivided, like you're counting 3, 3, and then 2 for 8, for 4/4, these beats. Not necessarily in this case, but honestly, my brain, I was like trying to count it, and I'm like, okay, no, never mind, forget it. Curious about maybe what was going through your mind as you write, and this is maybe even more just beyond this song, but when you write, do you auto write, or do you try to picture something in your mind, or do you think, I'm just curious about what is your overall thought process in terms of putting together music, and maybe you don't have a typical way of doing it, but maybe even have multiple ways, which is fair. You gotta have a few tricks in the bag, so to speak. I'm curious, what is your general, like, how do you think about writing?
That's a great question. I would say that first and foremost, I would say that it's kind of evolved over years as I've played with other people more, gotten more practice, with my instrument. When I first joined Withershins, I was, a completely self-taught guitar player. I never really explored any sort of formal music education. Didn't have a whole lot in terms of music theory under my belt, any of that sort of stuff. And I just sort of would improvise, basically. I would come to the practice and I would listen to what the band was playing, and I would, match pitch and try and just come up with ideas that I thought sounded interesting that could complement them. At that time, I mean, our entire first album, with the exception of a couple of songs that I wrote and brought to the group, it was pretty much all stuff that Isaac had already sort of written and had an idea for a band that they wanted to, start. So I was coming into a position where, I wasn't a primary creative contributor from a songwriting perspective. So I kind of found ways to fill that role through just adding on to what was already there. There are a couple of tracks on that first record that I did write, or at least kind of write the bulk of. And at the time, a lot of what I was doing was just playing my instrument a lot, listening for what sounded good. And if I came across a riff I would like, I would repeat it until it was muscle memory, and then think of something to go with it through that same sort of trial and error technique. As I've grown and gotten more experience, and also just, taken time to learn some more formal, music education stuff, I adapted that a bit. I mean, I still think I do some of my best creating just by jamming and improvising, and sometimes I find little seeds of wonderful things in there that I can then, kind of take out and work more on later. But now I could be a little bit more intentional when developing those. I'm not just going to say, okay, now I'm going to improvise until I find the next part. I'm going to say, okay, well, I came up with this part and I like it. What works with it? So yeah, I would say it's a little bit of, still both there. It also, I guess it depends on the format too. I've also done in other bands that I've played in, I mean, guitar has always been my main instrument, but I also played a lot of synthesizers, keyboard stuff, and sometimes just general in the box, music production on my computer. And so with those, it's a little bit different way of thinking about the instrument and way of like thinking about songwriting. But ultimately, it usually just does boil down to me just jamming. I mean, it's a pretty common practice for me is just, you know, if I'm stressed at the end of a workday, I'll just plug in my guitar and just play without any, you know, ideas in mind. You know, maybe I'll warm up with a song I already know or something, but then will just play. And that's how I feel like some of my best ideas have come from there.
When you began writing this song, did you think this was going to be a Withershins song? Or did you say, well, this could be a song that I would be doing as any kind of project that you might have?
So when it started, you know, at the time I was obviously playing with Withershins. I was also doing my solo project that at the time, Dr. Responsible, and a lot of what I would write, I feel like especially at that particular era when we were kind of writing a material for Mount Fuji, a lot of what I was writing, I feel like could have kind of gone either way. I would say when I came up with this riff, I was initially kind of working on some solo stuff. And as I pulled it out, I thought, you know, I'll run it by the rest of the guys and see what they think. And in the back of my mind of if, you know, they're like, yeah, that's cool, but not for us, then I would, you know, flesh it out for my solo thing. I did think that it would be a little bit of a difficult one to pull off solo. I think it does really benefit from having more musical elements in it than just what I would be able to do on my own. I mean, that project, Dr. Responsible, was primarily like a loop-based thing. So I can, to an extent, flesh out and build out some more musical ideas into a piece, but I was also somewhat limited in that it's harder to have songs with like very distinct individual parts, you know, without changing them up in like a looping setting is a little bit more challenging. So I was very much interested in, you know, doing this for the band because I thought it would just work better in that setting.
On an emotional level, I really appreciate the whole, I've been told that it don't matter because we're already gone. As I had said, like, it's kind of this point of like clarity, and like, I'm fascinated by the concept of when you have nothing left to lose, you can accomplish anything, is kind of the, you know, when there is no risk in the end, the only reason to do anything, even if it doesn't matter, is just that it is something beautiful or it's something worthwhile in the end, because it doesn't matter about the risk. It's just about getting the beautiful thing out, or what is kind or worthwhile in the end. And even if it doesn't matter, I don't know if it's this weird paradox in my head, but I'm always like, well, it doesn't matter, but it would matter if it actually meant something. So to me, that line means something to me, and although it occurs twice in the piece, that is my favorite part in the song. So I'm curious, what's your favorite part in the song?
I do think that's a cool interpretation of that lyric. I would prefer to have said doesn't matter, but it didn't really fit timing wise with the song, so I said don't, and that always still kind of, I don't know. When I'm singing it, I think it sounds great, but like reading it on paper, I'm like, that looks weird. But that's just an aside.
Sure.
I talk a lot about how, you know, I don't consider myself much of a lyricist, and a lot of what I say I would ascribe meaning to later. That is one of the rare exceptions. I wrote the rest of the lyrics, and I wanted to have something for that part, and I didn't really know what to say, other than, you know, at the time, gosh, I would have been in my mid-late 20s at the time, and I'd been kind of going through this sort of like existential crisis, and I just started thinking a lot about, like, you know, death and dying. And that sounds a little, you know, morbid, but that's just kind of what was on my mind. And I was like, you know, it would kind of get in these situations of like almost panic of like, hey, I'm terrified of this, right? Like this unknown. And for some reason, I was watching this like PBS science, you know, like Nova thing, and they were talking about like relativity and how that, you know, affects time and stuff. And, you know, from a certain perspective, like what we see is actually something that happened, you know, in the past because of the time it takes light to get to us. And, you know, when things approach the speed of light, time slows down and blah, 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 all this. And it just kind of started getting me thinking of the idea that like everything that's happening has kind of already happened or hasn't happened yet, or it's all happening all at the same time, which is kind of where that idea of it doesn't matter because we're already gone. Like, why would I be scared of death if I'm already dead, you know? Or another way to think about it is kind of like you said, like, why worry about, you know, these potential negative outcomes? Just live in the now, live your life, make something beautiful, or don't, or whatever, you know, just do what makes you happy. And so, yeah, I think that's a really cool snippet that you pulled from that. As far as my favorite part of the song, you kind of talked about it, how it kind of like folds in on itself so to speak. I kind of think similarly, and I kind of think about it as like being kind of bookended by these two parts, like the intro and the outro are kind of like distinct from the rest, but they are two of my favorite kind of parts of the whole thing. I guess specifically, I would have to say the ending. We kind of like drone on that chord for a while, and all of us are kind of doing something with it. I think the bass part Neil came up with that is just suits the ending so well. Luke's drumming as he's kind of matching what I'm doing rhythmically with my guitar, the little riff that Isaac came up with to kind of go with it. I think it all just works together so well. And that also, I think, describes a lot of my favorite Withershins moments in general, in that, like, you know, we would often individually bring ideas to the table that sound really cool on their own, but then when we all kind of get together, add on our own individual little flavors to it, then that kind of elevates it in such a nice way. Yeah, I think the outro to this song is a great example of when that happened.
I hate that I'm kind of speechless about Withershins songs because they just, they are somehow accessible, but also with depth, which I don't know if that makes sense to anyone except maybe me, but I said earlier off mic, like, I feel like Withershins is one of those very formative memories of what is so great about the Champaign-Urbana music scene and the innovation and just the sound. I don't know. It's something that means a lot to me. The last question that I like to ask is, why did you pick this song to be the song you wanted to talk about today?
That is a great question. I thought about a lot about what I'd done, what I'd written over the years. I wanted, for it to be something that was representative of my time in Champaign-Urbana. You know, I've done stuff musically since I moved out to Salt Lake, but seeing as this is a Champaign podcast, I really wanted to just limit it to that. I also wanted to do something that was like, you know, represented not just me, but my collaborators, my friends. So I have plenty of solo stuff that I wrote and recorded as Dr. Responsible, and some, I think, you know, songs that I'm really proud of in there. But I wanted to also, you know, kind of highlight, you know, my friends, you know, the people I love. And I wanted it to be something that I was the primary kind of like contributor to. Most of Withershins was mostly collaborative. Early stuff was very heavily, you know, Isaac as a primary songwriter. And then as we developed as a band, we were mostly collaborative. But yeah, so I just wanted to pick something that, you know, I could kind of take some level of ownership on, but also that I was proud to share with my friends. And that really narrowed it down to a handful of Withershins songs, and I like this one the best, if I'm being honest. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Withershins song, but it's my favorite one that I was the primary songwriter on.
So what is your favorite Withershins song?
Might be a little bit controversial, but my favorite one is the title track for Mount Fuji in Blue. And I only say that as controversial because that was originally a song that Isaac had written for another project that they were in, and that band kind of dissolved. And so they were at practice with us one day, and they're like, hey, I had this song, you know, that never really went anywhere. Let me play it for y'all. They played it. I liked it. But it wasn't just what Isaac brought to the table. I like what that song became. I like what we all added to it. Again, I think that's where a lot of what I loved about that band came from, is not just what any of us individually would bring to practice, but what we would kind of come up with collectively to, you know, elevate it.
Champaign is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Jubilee Cafe. Jubilee Cafe is a free weekly meal program at Community United Church of Christ, 805 South 6th Street in Champaign, Illinois. Jubilee Cafe serves a home-cooked meal from 5 to 6:30 each Monday. Their mission is to feed hungry people by cooking healthy, delicious meals and by serving their guests restaurant-style with servers waiting on tables. Jubilee Cafe is open to anyone who cares to eat with them. Because food insecurity among students is so high, they serve students as well as others in and around the Champaign-Urbana community who struggle with hunger. Meals are free to all and will be served each Monday evening, located in the accessible lower level of the building at 6th and Daniel Streets in Champaign. For more information on the meal or how to volunteer, go to the Jubilee Cafe CUCC Facebook page or email them at jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. That's jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. Welcome back. So, of course, Bryce, What is your favorite Champaign-Urbana venue, past or present?
First of all, I would say that there were so many great venues in my time there. I think it would be really hard to pick a favorite.
You can list a bunch.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to, I could definitely narrow it down to my top two, and those would have been the short-lived but wonderful Velvet Elvis and Mike and Molly's. We played there so often. It was one of my favorite places to play. Even, you know, the indoor space, when it was too cold for the beer garden, it was still really nice, you know, even though I had to lug my amp up the stairs. I don't know, that felt almost like a second home to me as a band. Not me as a person, but, you know, as like a band member, that was like, yeah, my second place to be. But some of my favorite shows I ever played were at Isaac's old loft space in the Velvet Elvis.
Velvet Elvis. I don't even know what to even say about that, because it wasn't just like a house venue. It was clandestine, like above Cafe Kopi. And
also, I guess I have to point out that I complained about carrying my amp up one flight of stairs at Mike and Molly's while completely celebrating Velvet Elvis as a third floor walk up. It was still great though. I loved it.
It was a longer staircase, wasn't it? For the Velvet Elvis. Yeah. Well, I never actually had to carry anything up the stairs other than myself for either of the venues. The upstairs at Mike and Molly's was the highest basement venue I've ever been to. You know, it just had that. I mean, even the windows, it didn't seem like the windows looked out on anything, but I'm getting flooded with all sorts of memories, because there's a few bands that I ended up seeing for the first time at the Velvet Elvis. I mean, I think of like The Fights. They played a show there. I think that might have even been one of their first shows, maybe. I can't remember. But yeah, I don't even know how to put that venue into words, because it was... How did that space have that much space? You know what I mean? When you... Like, there, it felt like... And I don't know what it looked like when people were living there, but it just seemed like the front room was huge, but like all the stuff was like cleared out. I'm getting caught up with this whole reminiscing thing, because I haven't thought about the Velvet Elvis for so long.
I mean, I spent a lot of time in that space, not just for shows, but, you know, Isaac lived there for a while. That was our rehearsal space for a while. So just being in that space with a guitar in hand just felt, you know, comfortable. It felt natural. It felt at home. And as you said, a lot of great bands came through and played there, even more so than a lot of house or underground venues I've been to. It just felt like, you know, we were in on something that, you know, we weren't supposed to be. And it was great.
Was there a particular show that you saw at either of these venues that sticks out in your mind as like a great show that you saw? Or is there another venue that you think of in terms of like a great Champaign-Urbana show that you saw?
I mean, when I was there, it was just a great time and space to be a music fan. There's so many great spaces. I used to love going to the Death Tower. Was a great little DIY house apartment venue that it was always fun to be in, and so many good bands came and played through there. Still Mike and Molly's, though, that one was one of the first places I ever went to see a show whenever I moved to Urbana. This would have been in like 2008, 2009-ish. The specific details escape me, but I want to say it was an early Take Care show. So I'll have to definitely fact check that later, because I don't remember exactly when they started, but it was around the time I'd moved to town, and it was one of the first local bands I saw, and they are great. Also, one of the first just show experiences I had, and I remember being at Mike and Molly's thinking like, oh, this is a really cool space, and there's good music and great people, and it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, certainly the one thing that I always thought was kind of beautiful was the beer garden. It sounded great, but also it had a very like beckoning, like if you really wanted to, you could catch a show by sitting outside the gates, right? Like you could sit outside and watch it from behind the fence. I think that was part of what made it so amazing, is that, you know, you just kind of felt compelled or drawn in to actually come in and pay the cover and sit down. And I just miss that whole, like when the breeze would kind of come through, and like if it was quiet, you would hear all the vines, the leaves would kind of rustle.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just had a really unique feel to it. There's something that is missing now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I recently was having a lot of these same thoughts and feelings you're describing. So I'm in the middle of a move right now, just from one home to another. And I was kind of going through some of my old things, packing things up and, digging things out. And I found a flyer that I hadn't seen in years, but just like a little show poster that I still have from, so Withershins played the very last Micah Molly show that ever happened. And, that was, Isaac is the one that made that happen. They were very much like, we love this space. It's been a regular place for us for as long as we've been a band. We want to be there to send them off. I think it's really cool that Isaac was able to make that happen. But yeah, I found the flyer and I'm just like, oh, this is like something I haven't thought about in years. And it just kind of gave me those kind of warm fuzzies, that like a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of sadness, a little bit of like, mourning something that's not there, but also a little bit of, remembering how much fun I had in that space over the years.
But along those lines of like the history and like the existence of the Champaign-Urbana music scene, I'm just kind of curious, what's your take on what makes a good music scene?
Yeah, I don't think that there's one easy answer there. Some of it's going to be kind of like, I don't know, kind of cliche answers. Like a good strong foundation of community, camaraderie, of collaboration. I myself played in multiple projects, in my time in Champaign-Urbana. I had several friends who also were playing in multiple bands. And I think having that strong sense of community of people that, you can like be creative with goes a long way. I think sometimes also it's just like there's just some, I wouldn't even know the word to describe it, but just some like quality of a specific time and place that's just, almost like a spark for creativity. And I think that could, be cyclical. I think it come in waves. I think that, in my time in various communities, I've seen, ebb and flow of like what I would consider like a good music scene. Engagement of people, even as observers of music, is a big part of it as well. Having a good community of musicians gets you halfway there because all your friends who are also musicians are going to come to your show. But also like having just a good general public who appreciates, local arts, I think is very nice. I think those are all things that Champaign-Urbana has had going for it over the years. It's a great town that attracts a lot of great creative people. I think the university probably helps that a lot. But yeah, I don't know. It's really hard. There are things that I can't even really say I could put my finger on or know the word to say it.
I almost want to say if there was a way, I don't know, if you wanted to, I don't know, compare and contrast what's happening out in Salt Lake City. Are you involved in the music scene out there? I'm just curious what you're doing musically out in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I have been varying levels of involved in the scene here. I enjoy going to shows. There's like a pretty vibrant group of electronic music synthesizer enthusiasts in town. They'll do like regular meetups and that kind of thing. So I participate in those from time to time, but I haven't really been doing as much like active participation in creating music out here. Life gets busy sometimes. I'm in grad school right now. I'm working full time, trying to manage all of that, but mostly I just jam at home.
Anything that you've observed that reminds you of Champaign-Urbana or something maybe Champaign-Urbana could use or you really miss from Champaign-Urbana?
I just miss being there, to be honest. I love it here. But in terms of like being a musician, yeah, I don't know. I haven't really found my community here in that regard. I think I've played more shows with Withershins since I moved here than I have done like with anybody here.
Right.
Just fly back and, do a gig.
Champaign is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Exile on Main Street. Exile on Main Street, located in the old train station building at 100 North Chestnut Street in downtown Champaign, has been helping to build record collections since 2004. Carrying a wide array of new and used LPs, CDs, and video games. Exile on Main Street has something for just about any music enthusiast and old-school gaming devotee. Exile also hosts regular free live music shows on its stage, so be sure to check out their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for the up-to-date details on the next upcoming event. Open 7 days a week, they can be reached by phone at 217-398-MAIN. That's 217-398-6246. welcome back. So, of course, Bryce, what is your favorite non-musical thing or things?
So many. I like to dabble. I have a lot of hobbies. I like film. I like to watch movies. Lately, I've been getting into sailing. It's a lot of fun. I have a friend with a boat who takes it up to a lake up in the mountains out here in Salt Lake. So I'll just go out with him and sail around. I don't know. I like experiencing different things, I guess. So it's hard to pinpoint a favorite non-musical thing. Music has been a big part of my life for, pretty much my entire adult life. So that's kind of a foundational kind of focal point for me. But outside of that, I just like to, try new things. Lately, I've been getting into trying to make the perfect Mai Tai. That's my current hobby.
It's funny. I hear the word Mai Tai, and I know what a Mai Tai is, but I don't know what is in a Mai Tai. So please tell me what is in a Mai Tai.
Yeah, it's a rum-based cocktail. It's got some lime juice, got some orange curacao, a little bit of orgeat, which is like an almond syrup. Serve it over crushed ice. I like to put a little bit of a bitters on mine. Okay. Serve with a mint garnish. That's important. It needs the mint.
Really? Okay. Maybe I need to order a Mai Tai because I'm not picturing. Maybe in my brain I'm like, oh, the tequila sunrise is what I'm thinking, but that's not what. Because I'm like, it has a cherry, right? But it doesn't sound like it has a cherry at all. Mm-mm. Do you have a particular genre of movie that you're into?
I like a lot of movies, good and bad. So I would say no, not really. It just kind of, depends on my mood, depends on the night. Yeah, sometimes I'll try and watch something that's kind of serious, thought-provoking. I like various world cinemas. Sometimes I just want to watch some bad action. It's great. I think movies are great because it's something that you can use as both serious art that you can use to be thoughtful about, and or you could just use it as just pure escapism. I don't know. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I would guess, what is your favorite guilty pleasure movie, if you have one?
That's a great question. Boy, I don't know that I could answer that off the top of my head.
I to be honest, I don't know if I I can think of one, but honestly, it's like a good sci-fi action movie that kind of has a decent plot, but just moves along well. I don't know, I guess.
If I'm going pure guilty pleasure, probably some old Sandler movies, just some like Billy Madison. I don't know. I think Billy Madison is perfect comedy. It's dumb, but it's good.
I hate when I ask a question that I can't answer myself. So now I'm like, oh God, what can I actually think of? Honestly, it's not really a guilty pleasure, but one that I could always kind of come back to and just watch over and over. I would say kind of like an Indiana Jones. Any of those, well, not all of them, but but probably anything from the first three I could probably watch and enjoy and just be like, it meets that. I don't know if that's guilty pleasure. Maybe I'm not being honest enough, but
I never saw the I've only seen the first three, actually. I never saw the Crystal Skull.
No, that's okay. You don't have to buy. If you want to.
There was one after that, wasn't there, right?
It was like the Dial of Soap. The Dial of Time or something. I don't
gotcha.
know.
Okay.
Shoot, what was it? Honestly, I had no idea. Yeah, I have not bothered to watch that. Yeah, so of course you mentioned sailing. So are we talking what kind of boat are we talking about? What kind of sailboat are we talking about? Is it a larger, or is it? I'm not going to get into is it a skiffer, or is it a jillywag, or is it
mostly it's a small little. It's called a little beach catamaran. It's just a little 16-foot sailboat. Okay. I'm not super. I've done some sailing classes, and I can sail. I think the biggest I've sailed is a 35-foot, just whatever yacht, I guess you'd call it. But mostly just my friend's got a little tiny boat that he keeps at a beach nearby that I have the privilege of being able to use whenever I want.
I had to laugh at myself because, well, maybe I shouldn't, but I was going to say, when you first said, sailing out at Salt Lake, I was like, Are there a lot of lakes out there? But I guess there are, because it's in the name.
One famous one, which I actually don't sail there. People do sail in the Salt Lake, but I don't.
Seems like it's
there's like
cheating,
a lot of
right?
yeah. There are a lot of like smaller, like up in the mountains around Salt Lake. There are a lot of smaller lakes and also reservoirs.
From like a Zen perspective, I'm thinking, I'm like, well, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever the wind is giving you, right? Like you have you have to somehow exert control over something you have no control over, right? Like you can't control how the winds are going to be, but I find that fascinating, but also something I would never do because that would frustrate me. I don't know how, is that, like, what is it about sailing that appeals to you?
I mean, yeah, you kind of hit it on the head there. It is about just being able to like be under just the power of the elements, right? Of nature. Like I can go out and as long as there's some wind, I can use that to propel myself across the lake. You know, it started out honestly as like kind of not early COVID, because we were also kind of locked down then. But as soon as like kind of lockdown restrictions started easing, my friends didn't feel comfortable gathering in like enclosed spaces, but like they were like, hey, we can all go to the lake somewhere we can be outside together and still be kind of distant. And that was also the year that my friend had bought his boat. He got it for, he's a German. I think the expression he uses is he got it for an apple and an egg or something along those lines. Basically, he had a friend who wanted to get rid of it, who sold it to him for next to nothing, with the caveat that he could also use it anytime he wants. It started out as just a way to be outside and socialize with friends. It's something that I just sort of kind of fell in love with. It's just a lot of fun. It's a good way to get out of the city, get away from it, you know, and just be in the middle of a lake. And even if the wind dies for a little while, then I'm stuck in the middle of the lake, surrounded by beautiful mountains. I mean, it's not that bad.
Bryce, thank you for being on the show and telling me about your song, Eternal Return, telling me about the Champaign-Urbana music scene and your favorite Champaign-Urbana music venues, and then your favorite non-musical things. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed chatting today. Thank you for listening to Champaign is Also a Band podcast. This is Bryce Hays reminding you, great music is out there. Go find it where you live.
That's a wrap.
Champaign is also a band.
You almost have an NPR voice. It's so good.
Studio South Peter on the inside.
Like it has a cherry, right? But it doesn't sound like it has a cherry at all.
Mm-mm.